Eric asked that I introduce myself and what did I do after Columbia. And after Columbia, I went to Vietnam. And then after Vietnam, I went to Stanford Law School. And after Stanford Law School, I worked for Paul Weiss Rifkin in New York City. And I was there for 2 years, and I worked for the Treasury Department on tax policy for 2 years. And I clearly was a lover of tax policy by that time, and I haven't strayed from doing that. I started teaching at Rutgers in beautiful downtown Newark, and then for the last 40 years, I have been at the University of Texas in Austin. I hold the John T. Kipp Chair in Business and Corporate Law, and I text teach at Taxis. I taxes text teach or something of the order of that order of I teach tax. Anyway, I am a tax lawyer and committed to it, which has absolutely nothing to do with what I have to say today, which are reflections on Vietnam. And I start Roman numeral 1 with through the rear view mirror. I landed at Travis Air Force Base in California and was discharged from Oakland Army Terminal on August 17th, 1968. Susan Milmo, who grew up over my back fence in White Plains, New York, where I grew up, and her boyfriend picked me up and took me to lunch and then to the City Lights bookstore in San Francisco. City Lights is a left-wing beatnik bookstore, pre-hippie. We didn't even have any term for hippie back then when they started. And Bill explained that the Harvard Revolution, I think I have to quote this directly, had raised the consciousness of the people as to the connections of the Harvard Board of Overseers to the industrial military complex. That wasn't the way we talked in Vietnam. I had not even known that there had been a Harvard Revolution, but I recognized the language, and I knew that I was not in Vietnam anymore. I started law school 10 days later, loved it from day one. There was abstract, excited conversation, just like being a philosophy major. Just like Columbia before I left. Plus, there were beautiful women, which college did not at that time have. As we all left Columbia, Columbia allowed women to the dormitories on alternate Sundays from 2 to 5 with the doors open, lights on, and 3 feet on the ground. I think Columbia's policy at the time meant they were trying to prevent undergraduate sex. On return, Stanford had coeducational dormitories. Another revolution that I had missed entirely. I also got to sleep in a bed with sheets. Food was a lot better. Nobody was shooting at me. There were Stanford classmates who said they were all burned out from 4 years of undergraduate straight into law school. And I have a remedy for that. Go to Vietnam. It prevents burnout. Occasionally, someone would point out another Vietnam vet, but they turned out to be Marine officers and not Army grunts, PFCs. And that was already another planet. Almost immediately, certainly had nothing to do with me. I do have recurring nightmares. One recurring nightmare. On your way out, just before getting on the airplane, there's a mandatory re-up interview. I saw my file. Somebody had written rare duck on the cover. There were not many people with college going through my platoons. In my dream, I say yes to re-up for another tour of duty in Vietnam, and immediately wakes me up. And I spend the rest of the night trying to find a way getting out of this re-up agreement. I had a marriage counselor 35 years later who said, apologize for surviving to those good men who are dead. And I did, and found myself crying. They were good men. I cried profusely in Vietnam when Puff and when Zeke were killed. But other than that, I think I adapted to civilian life very quickly, and very effortlessly. Wasn't any trouble. Well, Roman numeral 2 is the night I was wounded. The MOS for infantry reconnaissance was to scout around undetected in the woods. But the Mekong Delta, where we were assigned, is one of the most heavily populated areas in the world. We were never undetected. So the platoon, 2 squads, maybe 15 men, were most often used just as a small infantry unit. We were assigned at the time to protect Highway 1, which is an improved dirt road that carried a lot of commerce during the day from the Mekong Delta into Saigon. We usually patrolled a click or two, a kilometer or two off the road. Sometimes we got to sleep in a fort consisting of thick dirt walls that gave protection to maybe a dozen men, but no roof. Gary, who had been a rug salesman in Decatur, shot someone trying to get through the barbed wire with a satchel charge into the fort. You could smoke even at night in the fort if you kept your head low, but you couldn't stand up in the fort and get any protection from it. The night before the night I was wounded, the Viet Cong had dug a gargantuan trench across Route 1, maybe 6 hours of work for a dozen or more men. And we were assigned to go out that night near the trench to ambush whatever was out there. There was a farmhouse and orchard across the road, and the Vietnamese owner gave each of us fruit. I think it was bananas, but it might have been something else. Anyway, a dozen of us set off. The captain had chopped down some of this guy's orchard trees to make firing lines when we first arrived in the fort, and the owner had broken into tears. But the fruit was a nice gesture, so we might have been forgiven. The lieutenant leading for the night was ROTC. On the US side of the Big Pond, the pecking order was West Point, who knew their business and cared about their troops, but they were rare. Then came the ROTC, who had had college, and then the officer candidate school people. The officer candidate school, OCS people, were often macho, overeager nuts. In training, us college kids liked the ROTC officers because they would fraternize with us, cynical college kids a bit. We thought the OCS officers were a bit too gung-ho, a bit crazy. Once in Vietnam, however, the pecking order changed. OCS did an admirable job, and ROTC did not. The OCS officers would themselves do whatever they ordered us to do, and they were very serious about their job. The ROTC officers had picked up some of the growing anti-war movement, and they tended to be cynical and look out for number one only. The particular ROTC officer leading us that night had called in a non-existent firefight a while back and won a medal. We put 3-man groups, say 30 to 50 yards outside the fort or any camp that we set up, give early warning if we're about to get run over. Nobody liked it. One of the 3 on the patrol was recurringly going to sleep on their watch. Our ROTC leader had called in that he was taking incoming fire and shot off some rounds because he didn't want to stay there on the 3-man patrol. Now, the two enlisted men with him, of course, knew that there was no incoming fire. So we all knew he had simply made it up. The ROTC officer leading us thought he heard and saw something, and we went into the ground behind one of the berms that surround the rice paddies, too close together for sure, and we were trying to ambush them. And then we were the ones who got ambushed from behind. A spray of rounds went across Chapman, lying to the right of me, and then one bullet went into me, and then on to the next guy on my left. I thought Chapman had kicked me hard, and then I felt I was wet. Must be bleeding to death. Then the bright guy feared it was not blood because it was cold. The bullets had ripped up the side of my plastic canteen and then ripped muscle and embedded itself in my ham coming in from behind. It was not on a pleasant course, but the canteen had slowed the bullet enough that it never made it and got stopped by my ham muscle. Greg to my left went home with serious injuries. He survived the night, but I never learned how badly he was injured. The medic said he could not give Chapman to my right morphine because the wound was to his core. Chapman moaned and his lungs gurgled. I told Chapman he was going to get to go home. Chapman had an Indian wife in North Carolina with TB, and he wanted badly to get there. He and Kid, who was another fuck up, had taken a duster round, a light tank shell, and broken Chapman's arm in 3 places. Then came up with a story that he had tried to carry a trunk down from the 2nd floor of the barracks and had fallen on his arm. Didn't get him home. He spent the recuperation period on KP and burning the outhouse cans. That night was his first day back. There were a lot of people in the Army who were very bright, but never had had any access or thought very much about going to college. Chapman, though, was slow. For my part, the bullet in my leg was adrenaline. For the first time, I knew I was going to survive against the odds. I was straight-legged and the ham swelled, but I could gimp around at some speed and ultimately help get Greg to the road. The first medical evacuation helicopter took fire as it was trying to land and took off immediately. So we stayed in place for some hours until the supply sergeant from our company drove a truck down Route 1 road, stopped 50 yards away, turned on his lights. We moved to the road. The helicopter landed in the lights and took the 3 wounded off. The medical helicopter had room for 4 double-decker stretchers on both sides. Chapman was above me. The medic came and said Chapman was dead. I knew. He had bled through his stretcher on me, and the blood was cold. In the hospital, I told the doctors I had a ham muscle ripped up and they should spend time on others. So I laid on the gurney for some hours, but by the end of the night, they had dug into my ham on local anesthesia and took out the bullet. And no, I did not want to keep the bullet. Thank you. I always had a book in Vietnam on patrol. They were paperbacks, and I could rip off whatever I'd read and keep only whatever I had not read. I got to read in the hospital. Pretty nurses who got invited to embassy parties, because pretty American girls were very rare in Vietnam, would come by and say some things. But my favorite visitor was a Catholic priest with a distinct brogue who would come by every morning. First time he asked if I was Catholic. When I said no, he said, "Quite a moniker if you do." My first name is Calvin, which is not a very Catholic name. Then he talked for a while, and after the first day, he would just look at my name on the bottom of my bed, put his head to one side, click his tongue, and then he'd sit and talk for a while. My favorite visitor. Took me 6 weeks to recover in full, including get back into a couple of mile runs to get in shape. I had to rebuild ham muscle. Our deaths are from walking around above ground. And if you are on the ground, or even better, below the ground, then the death rate is not bad. Fatality level drops to modest. I had seen a ground radar equipment in OCS, and the company with infantry reconnaissance squads also was the same company, also had miscellaneous group within the battalion with ground radar, so that I became a radar outfit from June when I was wounded until departure in August. My job was to climb a tower from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. and listen. We got a lot of false positives. It sounded to me like the whole North Vietnamese army was coming across the rice paddy. But when they shot up the flares, we could see nothing. The time in the tower was my only duty. So I had 10 to 12 hours a day on pinochle and reading. I became an erudite, learned man. I read Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, explaining how the Algerian rebels had to kill the most popular French farmers because that was the effective way to win the war. I read Norman Mailer's Naked and the Dead. I was reading 2 long books a week. The Army lets you out for up to 2 months early if you had to go to school. Me being no dummy, realized I was going to go to school. Had not the foggiest which one and where. Law and Stanford were by default. But I read a book that said lawyers were the last generalists with a wide range of what they could do. So I could go to law school without knowing what I wanted to do when I grew up. The Army indeed let me out on 2.5 months early to make start of classes and 10 days of in between at home. But I was right. As soon as I was hit, I would survive the war. And in fact, I did. Roman 3, death. The most valuable thing I learned in Vietnam is that death is inevitable, but it does not matter much. Many of my platoon mates were sure they were going to die and did. You still do your duty and protect the other guys. When you first arrive in Vietnam, everything is scary, even in circumstances that are not all that risky. Everything is strange, Technicolor travelogue. The Bien Hoa base where we were first landed, where we stayed when we first landed, had 10,000 soldiers, and the Viet Cong would lob mortar shells in and kill someone every week or so. But those odds were quite fine by comparison. The infantry reconnaissance platoon to which I was assigned had a 50% death rate over the course of a tour of duty. That rate turned out to be a little low. I was there for only 9.5 months and got out early to go to Stanford, and half were dead. And another third were sent home with serious injuries that affected their life. We handled it with black humor mostly. Story was that when you reported to the barracks, the sergeant would say, "Soldier, here's your death certificate. I rip it in half. Here is half. The other half will be delivered to you shortly." Similar humor. You are exhausted. Finally have to complain about something. Response: "Sounds like a personal problem, soldier. You should probably write to your congressman about it," which tells you to stop whining if that's going to be your only remedy. Then your body gets tired of being afraid and stops. A bullet lands 6 feet in back and 6 feet to your right and in front of you, and you say to yourself, "All right, Johnson, Time to get down, get, because it's no longer a protective, scared, fast reaction. Some in the squad felt they were safe until a bullet with your name on it came along, or thought they were John Wayne and the star never gets killed. I thought of my problem as minimizing statistical exposure, but with the same dryness that statistics have. Then at the end, you get scared again. You get to put up a short timer calendar to mark off the last 10 days. Mine had a picture of some guy in bell bottoms with a cute chick on each of his arms. And as the days get fewer, the more you were scared. On the truck taking me out of the village to the airplane, I hugged the steel bed of the truck, petrified that I would not make it. Me, who had survived the odds for so long, scared for no reason and in not an especially dangerous situation. It's just the timing when you actually see the prospect that you might well make it. Then you get scared again. Roman 4, combat. The American advantage is that if you can map a football field size area, the US can blow it up. Sometimes with smart bombs in Iraq, the precision got down to within a yard. But in Vietnam, it got down to within a football field area. The first priority of a lieutenant on patrol in Vietnam was to know where we are. Sweeps consist of walking across rice paddies in the dry season. The firepower on both sides is such that you spread out over a 25 to 100-yard area as we walk. Puff was the point man when he was killed. All across the Mekong Delta, the Vietnamese would build bunkers with 4 feet of concrete roof along the berms by the side of the rice paddy or in the wood line beside the rice paddy. They were necessary defensively because the US dropped a lot of heavy ordnance. Once a month, maybe 6 weeks, the bunkers would be occupied and they would open fire on us. Or a wood line without bunkers would explode with gunfire. And our job at that point was to suck as much mud or dirt as you possibly could. And the lieutenant would call in something to blow up the wood line or the berm. Tremendous variety in the ways he could do it. Sometimes the heavy mortar company from our own battalion, sometimes artillery from miles away, sometimes napalm, sometimes battleships shelling from way offshore. Sometimes Puff the Magic Dragon, which was a gunship that could spray 1,000 square yards with bullets in a minute. The infantry on patrol were duck decoys, there to draw fire so that we could exploit our technical advantage, the ability to blow up things anywhere if you could map them. Other than that, I never knew what we were trying to accomplish, and I was supposed to be a smart guy. The ability to explode any football field area is not nothing. But it is not a precise violence as the Viet Cong used. The Viet Cong would kill mayors, beloved school teachers, and anyone with an attitude against them as they drafted or recruited soldiers in the villages. The violence shaped minds on the ground. American violence was less precise. James Webb has a story of his Marine squad climbing up a creek to a hamlet and killing 3 Vietnamese. By the time they got back, the district chief had complained that they'd killed the only 3 pro-government people in the whole hamlet. Other than the ability to blow up precisely mapped areas, I don't think the American Army was a very useful instrument. None of us knew a word of Vietnamese or any politics. We definitely were an occupier army, not growing out of the people or whatever the term ought to be. In the dry season, we would set up in the center of the rice paddy and send 3-man outposts to the berms. New soldiers would set up the inside the berm to fire out at the enemy with our encampment behind it. Veterans would put the berm between themselves and the main body because the thing that was going to kill you first was friendly fire from your own encampment. I've been out on 3-man outpost when a duster round hit the berm just behind us. Another just barely cleaned the berm and got off into the field beyond us. The tank gunner had heard something, namely us. Somebody inside the parameters told him to stop firing because we had 3-man outpost over there, and he did stop. There were deaths inflicted by our own heavy ordnance in the squad just before I came. It was probably a problem everywhere. When we landed out of helicopter somewhere, the immediate need was to dig foxholes and fill sandbags. Get below ground and your chances are pretty good. We took sniper fire. One good man was sent home with a bullet in his head, and I think he never recovered from it. But most of the deaths were on patrol when we were standing up, walking around. We lost a lot of people to mines or hand grenades, strung high to spread shrapnel to passing GIs walking beneath. My favorite officer was a guy from Ohio who had flunked out of Harvard, and he stepped on a mine. I heard he lived, but went home, and I do not know how badly and how permanently he was injured. I never knew what was going on. I had no responsibility for knowing, but then I don't think the lieutenants or captains above who did have responsibility knew very much either. From a worm's eye view, there's nothing to tell whether you are fighting a righteous fight to king communism, protect a favored ally, or just walking around getting shot at, which is what it looked like to me. I don't think any of us understood anything about the Vietnamese. Vietnamese is a tonal language that has many different meanings for a single syllable. For instance, ma, depending upon the tone. Ma, ma, wa, all have distinct meanings. When I tried greetings from the phrase book, the old women we passed would break into laughter. So I think I got the wrong. Wrong term. The term gook applied to both friends we were defending and the enemy, so the language made no distinction, which undoubtedly affected action. It certainly was said, kill them all and let God sort them out, was a very cynical comment that was repeated. The very young Vietnamese girls could sell us Coca-Colas for the then outrageous price of $1 a can. And that was our only cross-cultural contact. The only thing pro-American for sure was the 6-inch parameter around a GI. I carried less ammunition than I should have. One burst clip and I was through. The sergeants or officers should not have let me get away with it. I shouldn't have let me get away with it. But then for all of the deaths that we took, I don't know that I ever saw a live Viet Cong. I fired my gun once in combat, and that was awful. I had jumped out of a helicopter ready to assault who knows what, and I fired at a peasant not knowing what I was doing, and thank goodness I did not hit him. I saw what was probably a dead Vietnam. He was in good shape, whereas the ARVNs and peasants had no muscles, no upper muscle strength. The firepower is too much. Combat was at night or with very thick jungle cover, simply because the people who exposed themselves during day got killed very quick. A man in our platoon won a Silver Star charging and knocking out a machine gun as we were on a sweep through a hamlet. That was crazy. A machine gun takes away all advantages of military prowess, but he had done it. I was on a 3-day R&R in Vung Tau during Tet. our unit got bloodied pretty bad, but TET for me meant all lower priority transportation was shut down. And so I had to stay on the beach with good food for a week when I should have had only 3 days of R&R. Bung Tau has lovely French colonial buildings. I hung around with someone who spoke Vietnamese, who said the serving girls were petrified the Viet Cong were going to come in and slaughter them all. But had I not been with a Vietnamese speaker, I would not have known what was going on over and over. I was lucky. When I first came in the country, the reconnaissance patrols were out in the field. I spent the first 2 weeks filling sandbags. I was under a sergeant, the same one, as it turned out, who was in charge of the ground radar at the end of my tour, who volunteered us every night to drive a shotgun on trucks going 50 miles an hour from the Bien Hoa base where I was to the MACV headquarters at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, just outside of Saigon. We never had any cargo to or back, so I think it was just showing that we owned the night. The sergeant who volunteered us was Greer, had married a German woman when posted in Germany, but he sure had no loyalty to us. He was a rabbit. The reason why he volunteered was that after dark, there was a bamboo rickety structure set up right outside the MACV headquarters, the headquarters for Army in Vietnam. And the structure was a whorehouse, and he wanted to get there. I have an image of a piece of earth mover machinery, 20 yards long, tires 14 feet high, parked outside of the bamboo structure that the wolf could have blown over on the first puff. This, I thought, was a fine image of what we were doing to Vietnam, the gigantic earth-moving equipment outside of the bamboo hut. Another image I remember was that we would drive through the hamlets and throw out sea rations to the kids. No orders to do it, and nobody stopped us. The kids learned to raise their hand in supplication, except that somebody had gone into the Mekong Delta before us and taught the kids to say, "Fuck you," with hands raised. The 6-year-old kids were teaching the 4-year-olds how to do it, how to raise their hand in supplication and saying, "Fuck you." I landed in Vietnam as a skeptic. Westchester, New York, my home county, turned from supportive to anti-Vietnam War between graduation in 1966 and 1967, and I think I turned with it. I had attended the protester march at the Pentagon in the 30-day leave before shipping out to Vietnam. Mostly a warm day and party atmosphere. I was not among the group that crossed the Pentagon to put flowers in the muzzles of the National Guard and levitate the Pentagon. But I went. I went to Vietnam Veterans Against the War demonstrations from Stanford when I got back. Again, a party atmosphere on a beautiful day. I very much liked the West Point officer later, who said he was a war skeptic, but he knew where his duty lay. I was an Eagle Scout, believed in duty to God and country, and was not close to be ready to move to Canada or wherever. Didn't even plan for a safe job, or at least did not do it competently. So I went. I guess I have time to insert one more small story, and that is on a Vietnam veteran march in San Francisco. There was a young second lieutenant looking out at the scummy protesters going by with this look of utter disdain, communist scum on his face, and he was so superior. But when I went by, I had a Medal for Valor and Army Commendation and my Eagle Scout badge. But more than that, I had one of the cutest girls I have ever dated on my right arm. And as I went by him, I got the most wonderful double take, and his jaw dropped. And I think he was envying not the badges, although maybe he was envying the badges, but he was envying the cute girl on my arm. I think that was worth going to Vietnam in order to get that reaction out of him. I thought Vietnam was not uninteresting, not terribly unpleasant. You are in good shape, get a lot of exercise, feel proud of being able to be called on by any day of night for some trek. You are like the people, you're with mostly, and if not, they are forgivable, and you need to have their back, and you're willing to do that. Now, if I'd been killed, I suspect I would have had a different attitude the whole thing. What a waste. But as it was okay. Those are my reflections. I'm perfectly willing to take an alternative point of view from anybody else.
There are some questions that are in the chat, and they appear to have been directed to me as moderator. So I'm going to slightly edit them and forward them to you. These are from Bob Meyerson, and he wants to know, having spent that time, which he calls awful, although obviously you've given us a much more nuanced view yourself. He asks, how can you not feel resentment to those who did not serve? That's his first question. And his second one is, what do you think of Tom O'Brien's novels?
I think my memory is that—
Tim O'Brien.
Remind me which one Tim O'Brien did. I certainly have read it, but I
think he means The Things They Carried. Yes, Bob, is that what you meant?
I have memories of two books, one of which I thought was surrealistic nonsense, just crap, that went off into junk that wasn't anything real. And I think that's Tim O'Brien, and I didn't like it. I just thought, why bother with any of that? But there was another reporter who was savage, who got it right and got it mean and got it no fanfare, no patriotism, no optimism. And that one was both uncomfortable and very, very, very good. I wish I could, in my old age, remember which one Tim O'Brien was. Actually, if I get a little bit of time, I think I'll call it up on Amazon while everybody else is talking and see if I can't give you a more straightforward answer. Do I have resentful for people who did not go? No, I don't. I did have a feeling of this was my duty. My daddy, I am of Swedish farmer peasant stock, and my daddy got sent through college on ROTC and went into the Army in 1939 to spend his 2 years and didn't get out until 1947, but also went from being a Swedish farmer to lieutenant colonel, like colonel. And that made him executive caliber in a chemical corps. He was a chemist. And that changed his life. And he was actually very grateful for the Army not only paying his way through college that they couldn't afford it, but also promote him enough so that he got a pretty wonderful job in research and development right away. And I kind of carried over a bit of the Army had been good to him, a sense of duty that, and I was just too early. I think the class of 1966 was too early to go to Canada. I think if I had been a little bit saner, I would have been taking typing lessons so that I could type fast enough to get a desk job at very minimum that I could have done. And so I didn't even do defensive of what kind of a job can you find that. I just kind of took it. There was this wonderful film called Americanization of Emily, which had James Garner in it and Julie, oh, what is her name? And James Garner played a character who was—
Julie Andrews.
What's that?
Julie Andrews?
Yes, of course, of course. How could I not forget that? He played this procurer for the admiral who got nylons and liquor so that the pretty women would come play bridge with the officers. And his admiral he worked for said, we need to make sure that the first man to die on Normandy beaches was a Navy man. And as the film develops, it looks like it's going to be James Garner who is going to be the first man to die on Normandy Beach, having so brilliantly avoided that. I really identified that movie as that as the luck bent, I would be the Columbia man to die in Vietnam, but I didn't. And since I didn't, it was it's what it's like when you don't get a choice of how what your life is like until you start choosing to be a tax lawyer, I guess, or shaping it yourself. And I think I was just kind of knocked around by the fates of luck, but it didn't come out bad. It was really kind of interesting, I'll say that.
Well, we've been finding it interesting. Can I ask for questions or comments from those other than Bob Myers, since he's had the first two with extensive answers?
Do you know if there's anybody else in the class who served?
I do not. There was a high school guy, two high school guys I knew who made it. One later committed suicide. And so he clearly was not very happy, but he was depressive before he went to Vietnam. There was another guy who was taken prisoner and spent, I don't know, a year in a small village. And later on, he went back and to the village and everybody said, no, I remember you. That was kind of fun. Or, I remember you. Oh, yeah, that was good. Everybody going back to Vietnam says they have this incredible attitude of forgiveness. We've been conquered by the Chinese and the Russians and whatever, and we've beaten them all back, and you were just the thing. I think they won the war, meaning their grand prize was that they get to put together our Izod shirts and our iPod for $3 an hour in these massive assembly plants. So very ironic what a victory over the American occupiers. I do think that we were basically occupiers, mainly because I don't think the Army was a very good instrument for accomplishing what we wanted to do. And we sure didn't know any Vietnamese. If we were there to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people, were we the wrong people to send in to accomplish that? I mean, I do think, I basically approve of beating Milosevic in Yugoslavia. It was worth doing. If you can send a few bombs, bomb the Chinese embassy, and in fact stop them from ethnic cleansing, I think that's worth doing, so that I'm not by any means opposed to American violence when it is effective. And Vietnam, it just wasn't effective. So probably wasn't.
What does it felt like to watch the last 20 years in Afghanistan? Have you had enough distance? What kind of memories and what kind of feelings is that stimulating in you?
That's a question I haven't thought about. And I think the answer is that when I got to the City Lights bookstore and had clean white sheets and pretty women and all this extraordinary stimulation of a conversation in first year, Vietnam seemed so utterly and completely remote. It was a different, it wasn't me, it was some other fellow who was walking around. And so I'm not sure I can even make the analogy. That was so far away. I mean, I don't think I have any special wisdom about Afghanistan. It looks like we clearly lost that war, as did the Russians, as did the British. And the Afghanistans are winning, are winning. You know, they are terrible people. There is nothing attractive of this fanatical Muslim fanaticism of the Taliban. I don't know. What's your reflections on it? How, as a non-veteran, how do you think about Afghanistan differently than I think about Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, you know, you describe Vietnam in more or less the ways that I thought of it. I'm sorry, there's an echo. Are you all hearing the echo?
Are you? I wonder. Are you near? What's the
People
feed?
could mute everybody but Peter and Calvin.
No.
I can mute too for a while.
Your description of Vietnam is much like I had imagined it, and sadly so. Afghanistan seems to be a predictable failure, but to have had a more noble justification than Vietnam had, in the sense that, but again, to display the sort of hubris that we've displayed repeatedly in our foreign adventures, but yet there's something admirable in Afghanistan that I don't think was there in Vietnam, which I think was just realpolitik.
I know David Sidorsky, who was a philosophy professor who I admired a lot in the teach-ins, said that, Vietnam was a matter of the plate tectonics, i.e. they were two great powers that were clashing, and you needed to have little wars in order to prevent the big war. And I think when I was at Columbia, I basically said, well, maybe, who knows, but maybe. I don't think that holds up very much now, but I don't think I think I'm kind of drifted to the anti-war over. Is that me? Yeah. So I'm echoing, and I got to go. I've got to go silent. There was, things that very intelligent people said. David Sidorsky is a analytic philosopher that I just had deep admiration for. So that there were things that could be stated in justification for the war. Do they look like they stand up? No, not especially. But they were satisfying in 1966. I don't think they were satisfying in 1968, but they were satisfying in 66. After all, the British had beaten the communists in Malaysia, that Hillsman was at Columbia talking about the Green Berets ambushing in the jungles. And, I guess push come to shove, I'm willing to use war as an instrument of American policy if it's cheap enough, if it's easy enough.
Yeah, if there's a reason, if there's a clear reason that has some moral basis to it.
We're glad you survived.
Yes,
yeah, I am too. Yeah.
Even if you are practicing teaching tax law, right?
What do you mean even? Tax law is intellectual eroticism.
Well, I don't know about the eroticism part, but you.
Hey, I love it. I love my field. I'm very proud to be a tax professor. Had a lunch with a Yale tax professor, which was supposed to be 45 minutes. And we talked for 2.5 hours just because we love the stuff.
So what's the effect of cutting your corporate tax rate or increasing the corporate tax rate?
I am in favor of raising $6 trillion by requiring the investments in intangible investments that Google has investments that are worth 1.75 trillion. I know that because the smart market says that their organizational capital or investments are worth 1.75 trillion. And that's after an incredible fight between the bulls and the bears and vectors and research going both ways. 1.75 isn't right because nobody can predict the future, but it's very real. And I would treat those things as investments. Current law treats them as expenses when they're really investments. They have continuing value by the end of the year. And I can raise $6 trillion this year, give a nice sugar bowl for the Biden administration. Doesn't require a single vote of any Republican member of Congress or any member of Congress. You just write regulations that says that intangible investments are investments. And under an income tax, that means they're not deducted. They give you basis instead. I mostly think you need to fix things by going after the undertaxed animals. Our BMS, our $4 trillion corporations pay effective tax rate of 1%, 2/3 of 1%, 1.2%. The high one is Microsoft at 2.9%. And I want to say, before you raise rates 1 percentage point, go after the untaxed, undertaxed, and they are just an open, fertile ground for us to cure any revenue problems we need in the foreseeable future. They are the contributor base of the Democratic Party, but my theory is perfectly reasonable, rational, airtight income tax theory. Make corporations subject to a 21% real tax and stop allowing them to deduct investments that have not been lost, and you will find plenty of revenue there. No need to raise rates, no need to go after middle class, no reason to adopt any of some of the silly ideas that were put forth in the package.
Have you written this up?
Fantastic.
Yeah, if you will email me, I am I can be researcher at the University of Texas, including my email, but I am cjohnson@law.utexas.edu.
If you have a reference, you can put it in the chat, of course, and we'll all see it immediately.
I'm not allowed to put it up on SSRN until a month after it was published, and it was just published last week. I don't know.
If you can hear me, and we have time, I'd like to get back to Vietnam and ask you about the literature on warfare, whether we're talking about War and Peace, Catch-22, The Naked and the Dead, Tim O'Brien's.
We do have limited time, okay, because it is now 9 o'clock.
Well, I'll leave it up to the speaker to decide that.
Well, I'm perfectly willing to talk. I did think Naked and the Dead was quite well done. I don't know if it was worth as famous as it has become, but it did have a feeling of men in groups fighting a nasty war. Mostly, I'm kind of disappointed by the Vietnam literature that I don't think, maybe I should sit down and write the great story, but the 4 pages I just gave you is just about what I know. So I don't know if I would be the one to do it. Dispatches. And if somebody can search on Amazon and tell me who wrote Dispatches.
Michael Herr.
Yes.
H-E-R-R.
Yes, that was quite good and very brutal, and had the feeling of he was there and wasn't pulling any punches. Tim O'Brien was surrealistic bullshit, and I didn't like it. The woman Fitz something or other was surrealistic nonsense, and I didn't like it.
Francis Fitzgerald.
But dispatches, I think, got it brutally right. But, I bet you I have survived not the war, but also the cross-examination with slings and arrows of my class of 1966 peers and the people who showed up here, haven't I?
No slings, no slings, no arrows, no
I
strings,
survived.
no strings except our heart's devotion.
Thank you for your service.
You know,
Yes, yes.
I don't like that. I don't know why. I mean, everybody tells me thank you for my service, and I guess I thought I was just doing what I was supposed to do, doing my duty.
I
you know,
think you're not getting a lot of comments really from us because we are all kind of deer in the headlights. It could have been any one of us telling this story. Each story would be a little different, but it's we all were close to having to go or having to make a decision to flee instead of going, and it's pretty. It's a serious contemplation. Just another comment. The Vietnamese that I spoke to when I went over there some years ago said that the difference between all the other invaders that they had and the Americans was the Americans left us things. We had thousands of trucks, and we had airports and ports and generators and things we never had before. And so
that wasn't on purpose.
No, they didn't. But they were very, very grateful for the gift. The Chinese left them nothing. They drove it back over the border, and so it was very interesting. And they have kept the building off which the last helicopters went in that iconic picture when we left. They've kept it exactly the way it was. And it's in the midst of a lot of historic buildings and modern buildings. And it's just there as this icon to the Americans leaving.
Well, it was their victory. It's just a very ironical victory when we need them, when we use them for $3 an hour to do all of our assembly work. That was their reward. But
they have the self-determination to decide to do it or not to do it. And that, after all, is all any of us can ask for.
Well, that's certainly right. That the people assembling for $3 an hour used to be on the rice paddies, and rice paddy was $1.50 an hour, and that is hard work. So the assembly may sound to us kind of dull, the same shirt for over and over and over again. But it is, after all, in air conditioned, and they are seated, and I think they even rotate so that they're not always so utterly bored at the same assembly position as they were before.
That's what my grandparents did in Canada when they came over from Russia and Lithuania. My grandfather had a sweatshop, and my grandmother came to work in it. Made vests. Over and over.
Yeah, the Women's Garment Labor Union, in fact, was a real important institution for lots of years in New York City. I just visited Roosevelt, New Jersey, which was a workers' paradise, a cooperative workers' paradise in New Jersey, named after our president, who they so worshipped. And there's a a wonderful Ben Shahn mural of the immigrants getting off the boat and immediately going to the sewing machines, but ultimately forming this workers' paradise in the middle of New Jersey called Roosevelt. It didn't turn out all that good. The factory failed, and they never wanted to do cooperative farming. But nonetheless, that was big history of New York for sure.
Worth trying.
Well, perhaps in our final session, which is Friday night, tomorrow night, is Ira Katz-Nelson talking about what it's like for a member of the class of '66 to be the provost of Columbia during this turbulent time. But perhaps in our final session on Friday, we can end with a chorus of "Look for the Union label." I've put the first two lines into the chat for those of you who need to be remembered. Okay, I'm sure you all know the tune. And
I should send you the Roosevelt, New Jersey tour of the wonderful Ben Shahn mural of, if we're going to talk about Union stuff, I can do that. Let me write that down, that I will send Daniel.
okay, great.
And please send us to the link for your article when you can.
Yes.
I don't think I know who you are by link, so you have to find me for me to respond. So I will respond to your email to me.
Well, I'm easy. I'm Dan, D-A-N, at med.cornell.edu. And you've gotten emails from me.
Yeah, you've gotten more. Yeah, okay. I think we can send you a list.
Yeah.
Great. Okay,
And I'll send you back.
Michael will do so.
But
Okay,
that's
great.
not Vietnam. That's tax law. You understand?
Yes.
We encase multitudes here. So thank you very much for this talk. Thank you, audience members. Don't forget tomorrow, and don't forget Friday. You'll get annoying email reminders from the organizers of this. This has been very nice. And again, thank you for sharing this. I feel just a little bit more sober, as well as a great deal more informed as a result of this session.
Thank you for inviting me. I was enjoying myself, so it worked out all right on my side too.
Great.
Great.
We did
See you
fine.
tomorrow night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Look for you
Good night,
tomorrow
gentlemen.
night. Good night, all.